Michael Martin, what do you take as your morning beverage? Is it always coffee, sometimes tea? What do you do? How
It's
much?
never tea. It's always
Okay.
coffee.
Is that for purposes of just like the power of it or an actual um taste preference?
Oh, definitely. Well, I'm not
Like
a
some
big
people
tea
say,
guy.
how you do take your caffeine? How do you take your caffeine in
I
the
take
morning?
my caffeine only comes to me via coffee.
Okay, yeah.
And actually at night, I mean, almost always, I'll drink some decaffeinated green tea.
Mhm. What's your relationship with caffeine? I realize the older I get, it does affect me a little bit more. Never with sleep. I have a feeling, being somewhat ADD, I guess, that like ice cream and coffee before bed, they probably just calm me down. But and maybe it's because I have the first desk job where it's not totally desk job by any means, but in my life, I'll have like one cup in the morning. If I finished two cups within an hour and a half, I think I just feel kind of unsettled.
Yeah, I don't get that. I probably have, I don't know, 2 to 4 cups.
Yeah, over the course of the day.
But that's if I drink any, and this happen has, it's not always true, but I try to not drink it after 1 o'clock in the afternoon
Yeah, okay.
because then I have trouble sleeping.
It does keep you up. Okay, yeah.
It'll wake me up. And that used
This
to
isn't a big mug, but it's probably I have a regular mug in the morning, average size. Then on my way in through the course of the day, I probably by the end of the day, maybe this gets down to there or something. I have no idea.
yeah. I don't mean, yeah. But I have to have at least two
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. That's my thing. I think the one, maybe the end of one, I'm starting to kind of like feel in my thing or my vibe. What is Rudolf Steiner says? Coffee helps you focus. Tea makes you more convivial. Something like that.
Yes,
Yep, yep.
he
I
does
think
say that.
that passes the smell test for me based on my.
Hmm.
What other interesting things does he say about food that you've used as guides to life,
That I've
or
used
that
as
you
guide.
find true?
Oh, I mean, don't eat stuff with chemicals on it. The whole all that he says in the biodynamic course is pretty fascinating. And in the beekeeping lectures
Yeah.
about what honey does to the body and how it's the kind of sugar that the body needs,
Doesn't
right?
he kind of drill down on the number six, like a six-sided? Like we need it brings the number six, or maybe it's seven. What's the number
No,
associated
it's
with bee?
six with
Yeah.
the honey.
In one essay I read by him, it's almost like he weaves it in such a way that you're getting this notion that your body needs six, man. It needs six-sided things, super, super bad. You know, and it's
Hmm.
again, it's just to give some of our listeners the some of the how do you describe it? I mean, you need all your senses open. You need to have a lot of openness when you read Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, you know what we should do?
What?
We should have my friend Stuart Lundy,
I've seen his
who
name. Facebook friend of yours, or what I've seen him
I
on
know him through
Twitter or something.
Facebook, but I know him.
Okay.
He's a biodynamic farmer. He now runs the Josephine Porter Institute
Well,
in Virginia. I think it's in Virginia. I mean, at least it used to be in Virginia. I don't know if they moved it to where he is or he moved to where it is. Um, but he's the guy who, he makes all the preps that they send all around the country.
oh really?
And he's been doing a series, not every week, but, kind of regularly about what do they call it? Chromatography, where they do like I don't know. I have never done it, but it's basically it's kind of a blotter kind of thing where they test the crystallography of, say, beet juice or their soil or something.
So what's the term again for it?
Chromatography.
Okay,
And what
no, yeah,
happens is you see the different geometric shapes that this or that substance makes, which
yeah,
is kind of a cool thing.
yeah.
We should have him on and talk to about it because he
Remember our
knows
buddy
more about it than I do.
TJ Germanario, his fascinating writings at apocalypso.com. They he was the one who pointed out to me the importance of he thinks heaven is 17 dimensions and that you find and he deduces that from other things. But then Salvador Dali's Last Supper, is in a dodecahedron, which is
Yeah.
a 17 sides. Some of those ones, like how do people discover that? And in Olivier Clément, no, not Olivier Clément, Olivier Messiaen, that great Catholic. Well, again, he challenges me. I've listened to him for many years. I don't have a great ear for music, but in his Apocalypse for the End of the World, which some people say is like a modern mystical musical masterpiece, the number 17 is just all over it.
Oh, really? I
Um,
didn't know.
yeah, and the cycle of the cicadas is 17, right?
It is.
Yeah, and I think
But a
TJ.
dodecahedron's 12-sided.
Okay, so what's the name of a 17?
I don't know.
Maybe there isn't. Yeah, no, you're right. Thank you for that. That's a big clarification.
But yeah, I
I'm
mean,
doing a mashup of like 12 and
well,
17 here.
17
I
is a
mixed
prime
my
number, right?
chords. Yeah, right.
It's a prime number.
Yep.
So there's
What's your
something I don't know. I don't know all the mysticism about 17,
No, do I.
but
John Michael
but
Greer
it's
probably would.
interesting you mentioned that because the song going through my head this morning is by the saw was by this because usually when I'm doing stuff in the kitchen before I do whatever, a song usually goes through my head, and the one going through my head this morning was the Saw Doctors song N17.
Huh, isn't that funny?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
There's some mystical congruence right there, baby.
Tell me, you in music. Amy and I, we went to see our uh, beautiful, beautiful grandchild, James Courage, in Columbus. That we were there when we did the Martin Nowak interview. Martin's quite a guy. But the question I had for you, Columbus. Oh, on the way back, we were listening to Stendhal's The Charterhouse of Parma. Wow, that's wild stuff. But when you can only listen to a book on tape for so long, I find, and then and we were kind of musiced out for some things. And I confess to not knowing much about him, but I think when you write on music, they're in your top two, but Fairport Convention. So I listened to the best of, and the song that the only one I think I was familiar with, or maybe there was a couple others mildly, was Where Does the Time Go?
Oh yeah.
Haunting, no doubt. Tell me about them and their genius for you and their background and things. What were they were late 60s, 70s type thing?
Late 60s, early 70s. Well, they're still around, believe it
Oh,
or not.
sure. Yeah.
But they started in the late 60s. Now they have had like this floating uh personnel
Okay.
forever.
Kind of like
Um
Menudo.
yeah, like Menudo. Don't they hit 16 they change?
Exactly like Menudo.
Exactly. But with Fairport Convention, what I consider the golden period of Fairport Convention, where was the version that had Richard Thompson and Sandy Denny in it, and that's
Where
who
does
knows
it?
when the time goes.
Who knows? Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the album. It's the first album where she joined the group, which is a beautiful song.
It's a
It's
beautiful,
extraordinary.
totally beautiful song. Yeah.
And that album and the album that came after, what was the name of that album? It'll come to me. But the album after that is what I think is probably the greatest folk rock album ever made, Legion Leaf,
Okay.
which
Legion
had
Leaf. How is Legion spelled in that sense? Like,
Liege like
oh,
you know,
Liege. Yes,
my
yes, yes,
Liege,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's not a slow moment on the whole record.
Wow.
And plus, Richard Thompson, too, I mean, he still is, but he was just a kid at the time. What a phenomenal guitar player. Very unique guitar player. And what was cool about them is they their first album was kind of like, and I can't remember the name of that one either, which has a really great song on it, "Meet on the Ledge."
Mhm.
From
I don't
really
know it.
good. I don't really like that recording of it half as much as I like it when Richard Thompson does it, but
Mhm.
it's a beautiful song. Richard Thompson wrote it. It's the first song he wrote at 19 or something. Um, but they were more like trying to do like an American folk rock thing at that time.
Uh-huh.
Easy listening, not really easy, but like CS&N kind of thing, right? Buffalo.
CS Net. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally got it.
They were
CS Net.
doing that, but a British version. But what they did at all of a sudden, with their second album, I think it was, they decided that well, why should we do this American folk rock when we have Britain? So they started to mine the folk traditions of their own country.
Yeah, I picked that up on the greatest hits a lot, and I figured that was probably your tie-in. And then I was just guessing, not having read any liner notes, that it was probably a like an Irish folk tradition, but you're saying no, kind of a British.
Definitely
Okay, yeah,
British, a little
yeah,
bit of Scottish here and there,
yeah. Okay,
but definitely, and that's it was really beautiful what they did. And then Richard Thompson and Sandy Denny would kind of write song, and that's what Sandy Denny brought to Fairport Convention is she was on the British folk scene, and she was actually doing a lot of traditional British folk tunes,
hmm
and she brought that with her. And then Richard Thompson, being Richard Thompson, said, "I want to write my own," and so he started writing kind of like modern British folk songs, in
yeah.
that idiom. And it's really great. I mean, like one of the songs that she brought out of the ancient tradition, which I was actually wrote about it this week a little bit, is Tam Lin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was probably on that greatest hits, I would guess.
Yeah, it was, absolutely. And so I recognized that the first time I heard that is because of my fascination with Hadestown. Still want
Yep.
Anais Mitchell on the show, but her rendition of Tam Lin,
Yeah,
which
it's
was easier
mesmerizing.
for me to follow than Fairport Convention, but because I knew the story, the Fairport
Hmm.
Convention, yeah, what a beautiful rendering.
Yeah, and and actually, I would just
Powerful story.
I wrote a little bit about Robert Burns on my Substack this week,
Yeah.
and Robert Burns has a version of that because Robert Burns back in the 1700s was collecting, folk songs from Scotland, and he would like, I wouldn't know if you call it modernize. It was in the
Mhm.
1700s, but he would add his own bits to it, right? He would do his own
Yeah.
version,
Hmm.
and I love that tradition.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean that's what when we talked to Olivia Cheney a year ago,
Yeah.
a little over a year ago, that's does that to a certain degree. And actually, a little while ago, I got an email from her. I don't know if it's still happening, but she has performed with Richard Thompson, and they did "Who Knows Where the Time Goes."
Yeah.
I there's a version of it which is kind of taken from the balcony at some concert from a few years ago of Richard and Olivia performing that. It's wonderful, and the sound's really good. The visuals are you're kind of far away, but the sound's super good. Um,
That our friend Stephen Clark on Tam Lin, he's promoting, of which our other who's been on the show, our other friend, uh, Lindsay. Um, we have to have her back on.
Lindsay Rose,
Yeah,
Montreal.
she's deep into this. I think through Stephen Clark, and I read this guy through Stephen Clark, R.J. Stewart, kind of a Celtic master of the
Hmm.
underworld traditions, but he does a whole underworld initiation based on Tam Lin. You know, there's just there's a narrative, there's a whole way in that
Hmm.
song, and to hear it from different angles that these
Right.
great traditions do is like looking at a spiritual path from a couple of different ways. So you're not. It's very liberating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and actually, in my book, in Mythologies of the Wild of God, the poem I have then, the Bechan, which is Irish for mushroom,
Okay.
is I wanted to write my version of Tam Lin.
I'll have to go back to that poem. Okay, I have the book. It's right on my coffee table downstairs.
So
Yeah,
so where it's a kind of an unanticipated journey into the other world, right?
yeah.
And which I think, this, it's kind of intersects with the things we talk about all the time on the show. I mean, like we talk to Sebastian Morello,
Yeah.
there's something to, and I think I've actually been reading I edited a couple books recently that are kind of about, I mean, mysticism and quantum mechanics and stuff like this. And I don't know, I'm not editing for in a scholarly way.
Off Capra, or no? Who
I'm
are
just kind
these
of fixing the
authors' names
grammar
we
and
know? Okay.
making
Yeah.
it flow like a
Yeah.
book, but it got me to thinking quite a bit more about when Stephen Clark or
hmm
Lindsay or Sebastian or my experiences with in writing that book, that I think I really think we're, as far as consciousness studies and all this other stuff go, we're
hmm
just we had such a little pinprick of awareness of what's really out there or in there or where, or that I wonder, I think, and I think all the great religious traditions,
Uh-huh.
at their best point to that, right?
Yes.
Um,
This is
and
already anticipating where I wanted to go so bad today.
well, good.
But God, continue, just freeload. Yeah, yeah,
Well, the religious traditions and the folk traditions, because you
yeah,
could
yeah.
say that without whatever you think about the message, but the experience of the little kids at Fatima, for instance,
Hmm.
that has elements of both folk tradition and Catholic tradition,
Yeah, yeah,
and the same thing with Lourdes,
yeah.
Bernadette, right?
Hmm.
And and I and uh and also, the thing is that there's so much we don't know, and what really now I gotta ask you two.
Yeah.
You probably saw this week. It just kind of slightly blew up on social media. I don't know if it was that big of a deal because I think it was a little bit. The discovery was a couple years ago, but the story that kind of blew up this week about what was discovered under the pyramids in Giza. Did you hear
Yeah,
about it?
like canals, or just like a whole other world down there, right? Or
Well,
beyond that.
and deep, and that basically the pyramids are just the tip of the
Oh, wow.
proverbial tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, so they
And that
continue on with
underneath,
that pattern. Huh.
and that underneath the pyramids in
Yeah.
Giza are these columns that are like 600 and I don't know how they're 2,000 feet. I don't know what the size was, but gigantic columns.
Yeah.
And the columns have like something wound around them,
Uh-huh.
like a spiral. And so I don't know what it is, but I
Yeah.
do know just like that, we thought they were burial tombs. Now people are thinking maybe they were power sources. You
Interesting.
know?
I've seen people play with that theory for a long time, but the larger concept that we're in our time, things are just kind of we're realizing the more we know, the more we don't know. And that's a
Yeah.
healthy thing. So that's the Graham Hancock thing. Talk to any young person. That's the main thing they're taking away from all these things about, in a very reduced form. I told you both my sons, I think, and I play into it once in a while, but I forget it probably as much as I play into it. But I confuse Graham Hancock with a guy from Ancient Aliens, which is just like a,
Oh
a
yeah.
cheap cable TV
The
show.
guy.
Yeah. And that bothers my son so much when they know I'm speaking as if the name Graham Hancock is that. But on the other
Uh,
hand, too, that let's say there's a lot of problems with Graham Hancock but still, um, what people are discovering, I don't know a young man. I'm worried about what some of these young guys are doing with gender and things like that, an overreaction or an over course correction. But all of these rad trads, orthobros, or anybody, they know that there's mystery in archaeology.
mhm.
There's more mystery now in prehistory than there used to be, and that's cool. That's
Well, yeah.
cool.
And I think this thing in Egypt kind of
Yeah.
doesn't make Graham Hancock look like the kook they try to make him look
Right,
like.
right, right. Yeah, yeah.
And I think,
Um,
but if we're going to talk about Tam Lin or the other world or whatever, right? Um, I don't know. They're probably not all the same thing, but I think they're all, put it this way, they're all telling us that there's more to it than we've been told than meets the eye. And that the
that's exactly it. Yeah.
And that the folk traditions were not, like when people talk about seeing fairies or whatever, right? So that these folk traditions were not just the made up fantasies of some uneducated rubes, right? That they were
Right.
actually, you look at the folk traditions on one hand, and then you look at the Gothic cathedrals or the pyramids or other kinds of wondrous feats of architecture that we can't even do now.
Mhm. That's
You know, I
hard for people to
that
understand.
was I mean, that and or whatever you want to look at, right? So you have those two ends of it, and I don't think they're
Mhm.
polarities. There's two manifestations of this kind of deep imaginative wisdom that also has an there's a practical, even there's a practical dimension to it as well. In fact, one of my favorite books is Nicholas Culpepper's The Complete Herbal, or
Okay.
The Complete Herbal, as they would say in
Hmm.
English, and which was, I think, published in 1630 or something like that. And in there, he's got he talks about all the different kinds of plants
His name
and
is Nicholas
their
Culpepper.
qualities, but also their what planets they correspond to or
Yeah.
whatever. In fact, if I can find it, it might be right here.
This is a thing that people like you and I do. Again, I used to get teased in campus ministry all the time because I'd be talking with the student and then thinking for a book and then start looking at shelves. And then I'd return to earth like 20 minutes later. But
I've
you did it in
returned.
about 20 seconds. It's
There you
awesome.
go. So I'll just give you an example here. So let's rosemary. I just turned it up to a random page, and it was
Okay, I want to guess on it. Rosemary, associated with the direction south. Um, fire, the element fire. I'm guessing it's kind of in that realm. You start saying some things. Yeah.
here's what he says. The sun claims privilege in it.
Yeah.
It is
Bam.
under the celestial ram, so it's under the
Okay.
sun.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
It is an herb of great use with us in these days as any whatsoever,
Fire. Yep.
not only for physical but civil purposes. The physical use of it, being my present task, is very much used both for inward and outward diseases. For by the warming and comforting heat thereof, it helps all cold diseases, both of the head, stomach, liver, and belly. And he goes on,
Yeah.
and that's the kind of stuff, and that's why I love this book so much.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, another book published around this same time, or I don't know if it was published, but it was written about the same time, is Sir Kenelm Digby's Closet Opened. Have you heard
No.
about this book?
No. No.
Sir Kenelm Digby um, was a interesting guy. He was the son of one of the uh, what do they call it? The Guy Fawkes conspirators.
No. Well.
We're going to blow up the Houses of Parliament. So he comes from a Catholic family. His father was executed for conspiracy, but he still maintained his nobility and privilege. And then later, then he becomes like a pirate on behalf of the British government, you know.
Mhm.
And then but he's also an alchemist, and he wrote the first literary criticism of the Fairy Queen by Edmund
Okay.
Spenser.
Well. Well. Yeah.
And he's this weird, wild person. But he was an alchemist, but he was also a big mead guy. And in his
Hmm.
book, Sir Kenelm Digby's Closet Opened, he's got, I think, 104 different recipes for mead and metheglin or all kinds of stuff. And
Yeah.
one of the main ingredients that he puts in his various recipes is rosemary.
Really interesting. Hmm.
Yeah. Which I haven't done. I mean, I've made a lot of mead, and we actually do grow rosemary, but I don't think I've thrown in rosemary in there. But one of them, he had a recipe where you throw, and it's like with culpeper, it's like it has great properties for the head or for the heart
Mhm.
or for
Mhm.
this, right? And so he puts like lemon balm and violets and rose petals, and so I've done a couple of those,
Yeah.
which are interesting.
Yeah. And for our listeners too, like you and I would, when we think about these things, and I can't put words or thoughts, and we're probably using the template of even for the pyramids in Egypt. I look at as how did those things go up? And that's where you have Graham Hancock. I don't even know what the current theories are, but if people who've read Owen Barfield, just Owen Barfield alone, but obviously he's getting that from Steiner, this notion of residues of a primal consciousness, a
Hmm.
more collective consciousness, out of which the residue, right now it seems to be at its apotheosis or something, but the seed is separated from the flower. But when we are all together in a flower, we can accomplish things like and we don't know how, so that's almost by saying that we worked more like we had properties that would allow us to work more like ants or something.
Hmm.
It still doesn't understand how they got those huge blocks together. But when I wrote to you, and I also want to weave in something like two themes that I think you're really good on. One is the the a lot of these people are. So I want to mention somebody who's published in Jesus the Imagination, my friend Father Isaac Slater. He's got a new book out, but it's not just, he's done different things before. It's Liturgical Press, Do Not Judge Anyone, a desert wisdom from a polarized world. And he's talking about like a real deep conception of the equality of all souls, like a gospel equality of all souls. And that theme in the Desert Fathers, about, not judging others. But when I was thinking of my friend Father Isaac, again, who's written in Jesus the Imagination, the a huge aspect of so many of these traditions we're talking about, the underworld tradition and so forth, it's been staved off in both the East and the West by the hypervalorization of monastic life to the detriment of like married life and so forth, right? You know
Yeah.
that, yep, that engagement with the world, that engagement with that, how much of that masked the feminine, the fear of the feminine. I know my friend Father Isaac, in fact, that he's not of that tradition at all. Doesn't have that clerical notion. There's not too many young people who feel called to that way of life. But the and that's where also another theme that I think plays into that, and I want to hear you on that first one, is the notion I texted you last night, say like, what you want to talk tomorrow morning. But you have in your first book, The Submerged Reality, you have a kind of a telling of the tale of like Natura Pura, and the role of where it ends up with science now, and we kind of have this atomized world and so forth, and the you know and that's kind of where we are. But for some reason, I just because of a lot of our show, kind of even the whole notion of sophiology is kind of an outcome of this world, that we see. So for me, it's not the even with the Catholic West um, and the Orthodox East, or when I think of the two political parties, or I think of probably Catholicism and Protestantism. It's always the things that these two entities that we see as opposed have in common that are the scary things. Republicans and Democrats. It's the things they have in common. They're both building a beehive. They're both using the world, seeing the world through algorithms and things like that. But
Hmm.
have fun for me a little bit on maybe you're good on this kind of, the denigration of married life and how, that kind of thesis that you first put forth, and it's not totally unique to you. I think you put it forth very clearly. But, what was going on in the Middle Ages? Because the other thing about the underworld I want to say is in the telling of this tale of like how maybe certain elements in the West lead to Nietzsche and nihilism. There's a reification of the outside world. This Gerald Hurd that I've mentioned so many times, where we are now is like, and you were at the microscopic level, we start to see these crazy things too. We're finding things in archaeology, like the pyramids, but we still haven't dealt with the fact that in physics, everybody uses these words like jargon, Heisenberg and so forth, but there's a great mystery there, and there's nous and there's paranous, paranoia, and that's
Hmm.
creeping into the mental health of our time. The contradictions at the roots of matter, and then the contradictions, at the same time as the Western world is kind of getting into this British empiricist mindset, contract theory, and all these things. You have the subatomic level where things are kind of really mysterious down there, and the uncanny, the weird is coming back. But at the other level was again, just as science is going on its march, you do have people like Sigmund Freud, and they're coming in and they're saying at the roots of a lot of this stuff are paradoxes we don't really understand in Carl Jung. But if you focused even on the basic telling of the tale and the submerged reality as kind of a little history lesson on how you see that for yourself.
Well, actually, one of these books I was editing this week,
Yeah.
um, the guy, they start to blend. Actually, these two books are so similar that they're blending in my imagining. But one of the things the guy was writing about was about music,
Okay.
and so you do a Pythagoras thing, right?
Mhm.
Where and you see this in Robert. Somebody sent me an email about Robert Flood this week. So Robert Flood, for instance, the British
Mhm.
Rosicrucian and physician, he makes a big deal about the monochord, which is we could
Yeah.
just say, one's a one-stringed instrument because it was about measuring the intervals,
Yeah.
right?
Illich does a lot with this, strangely. You wouldn't think it would come from him. He knows that, like, understanding this is, that's where we understand the modern
And
world.
it's
Continue. Yeah.
fascinating how,
Yeah.
if you start measuring a string and where the intervals are and do the calculations, it's kind of fascinating. But I also noticed from playing the guitar, it's not perfect, right?
Yeah.
So when there's a kind of unperfectness built in to the musical scale, to the
Hmm.
Western scale, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, and if you ever tune a guitar, this always happens on the B string,
Mm.
right? And so there's an element of, it's not, we'll put it this way, it's not perfectly logical and perfectly mathematical.
Yeah.
It's just like the calendar, right? Like
We're just like
the
a human being, the heart. We're kind of decentered, you know?
yeah.
Yeah. If the
It's
heart
not.
was just right, yeah.
It
Not
doesn't.
everything's, right.
And when we and I'd be interesting to talk to Martin Nowak about this,
Mhm.
but with the calculations, for instance, for the year, they always have to throw in a leap second or a leap year or
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Um, because it doesn't really correspond to measurement in the way we want it to
Or
correspond.
analogously, the metric system. We,
Right.
we look to it's the hyper-rationality. No, it's just a bar in Paris, folks.
And
It's
I
just a bar in Paris.
and
It's
I
an
think
abstract thing. Yeah.
now I'm no expert about this, but I would guess that quantum computing is trying to account for that
Say more about
element
that.
of
Like, what do
surprise.
you, what's the
I
logic?
don't
Yeah.
know much about it, but I guess quantum computing is they're trying to get away from just straight mathematical computing and
Yeah.
right
Okay. I see what you're saying. Sure.
right yeah because
Like introducing a little bit of chaos. Is that
yeah
quantum? Yeah. Okay.
because
I know
that's
that
the
when we
function
talk
of
about
life,
quantum
right?
mechanics, for sure, I didn't. Where do people use the word quantum computing? Is that like a lab in Switzerland where they're
It's
doing that?
all you hear about it all the time. I don't
Okay, yeah,
really know of
yeah,
them.
okay.
I'm well read on it,
Uh-huh.
but that's what I would suppose that they're
That's
trying
cool.
to do is they're trying to throw a little bit of the unexpected into the expected.
Yeah, like
That's
rationalize
how
the
the world really
unexpected.
is, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not, there's a little bit of, put it this way,
The uncanny.
like this song, The Wicked Messenger by Bob Dylan, right? I met a
Uh-huh.
wicked messenger from shallow he did come with a mind that could divide the smallest matter, right? So it's all about calculation, but calculation, you keep doing calculation that there's something is not cooperating
Yeah,
with and and this is the whole thing with rationality, right? I mean, the rationality is a nice thing.
yeah,
It's a nice thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Just like a hammer's a nice thing, right? But you don't use it for everything.
yeah.
There's also intuition. This is what Steiner is talking about. And there's nobody more logical than Rudolf Steiner,
Absolutely.
right? But he knows that that's not the whole thing, right?
Hmm.
And if you mention pure nature, Natura Pura, right? With and this goes back, well, it doesn't go back to Descartes, but he was certainly the one who made it culturally legit with the cogito, right? That he
Yeah,
he divided the world, the unseen or the mysterious. I can't calculate that, so I'm just gonna look at the stuff I can calculate, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and but that came out of La Flèche University in France, where he
Hmm.
attended school, Jesuit school, and so that's kind of, but which was really kind of an outgrowth of nominalism, right?
Yeah, right, right.
You know, um, this kind of love affair with logic and seeing what that can do.
So you
Which,
trace it to nominalism.
yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
because like there's this Christos Inaros and this, not Gerald Hurd, but could say, that the roots of it, but when you read Chesterton on Aquinas, but the roots of it for this Christos Inaros are kind of in germinal form and maybe Augustine, but right there in scholasticism, where the definition of Aquinas is like, that it creates the outness that Barfield, the romantics were dealing with, the outness, because once we say that thought is our idea of the thing is adequate to the thing itself, it's the same thing we're talking about, Michael. You and I both know something escapes. Women is more than women. Bread is more than bread. And
Mhm.
that even that small little error from Aquinas, I'm not good with the Latin, but that the mental the mental concept of the thing is adequate to it.
Right,
Norris wants to say that, apophatism, the notion that in the Western church we would say you could get closer to God by saying it's not love because it's so much more. The apophatism that Norris says where this same phenomenon you're talking about in scholasticism, right there with St. Thomas Aquinas. That's why I love this story where David Bentley Hart, he just thought it was totally nonsense. But Marie Louise von Front, this old traditionist, she mined that old tradition that Thomas Aquinas retired and wrote alchemical tracts, right? Aurora Consurgens. And she
right.
has the foreword to Aurora Consurgens. It's on my library.
Hmm.
Um, some things are true even if they're not true. like that one maybe. But you know, I'm
But,
captivated that because it accounts for contract theory, it accounts. But do you see that in scholasticism yourself?
well, yeah, and
The
the
thing
weird thing
escapes.
is,
The thing escapes. You know?
yeah, well, with Aquinas, I mean,
Yeah.
it
Right.
might be true that he didn't write Aurora Consurgens, but he definitely said, "All my work has
He,
been nothing but straw."
and he wrote the Corpus Christi prayer. In a
Yeah,
good way, poetry. He saw the
yeah.
truth, the higher truth of poetry.
And the weird thing is, so here's Descartes, right?
Mhm.
So before he writes the third meditation, I think it's the third. That's the one where this happened. It was prefaced by a dream. You
Really?
know, he
Yeah.
had this mystical dream about the book, the Corpus Poetarum, the body of the poets,
Yeah.
right? And he has this mystical experience, which leads him to materialism.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's the
Which is
thing. It's just,
bizarre.
yeah, for Lindsay Rose, that's also the great thing with this Peter Kingsley, who I've written to. Maybe he'd come on because I think he had taken like 6 months off from doing anything. He's a weird, like esoteric guy in a cool way, but he does it with the pre-Socratics. You know, that all of Western left brain logical positivism, you know, or the syllogism comes from the pre-Socratic. So like when you take a formal logic thing, you're going to hear that the rudiments of that were found in like a poem of Parmenides. They don't call it a poem, but like something cannot be both A and not A at the same
Right.
time, right? And what Kingsley does is say these people, the pre-Socratics like Parmenides and Empedocles, they were shamans buried in mud and they saw the divine feminine and wheels within wheels. And that little fragment was part of a larger poem that had to do with meeting the divine feminine. So the whole birth of the West is his theory. The whole birth of this logical West that might be in its, like, I think we're, according to Greer, you know, in a massive kind of decline right now. But
Hmm.
that whole thing, it's never really understood itself because it can't see these things. There's always something more. Logic came out of poetry. You know, the left brain comes out in one sense. I bet you if they go back to evolutionary biology, you'd see the left brain growing out of the right brain. You know, I don't
Hmm.
know if we have scientists listening to this. It's just a conjecture. I've never read anything out of it.
Well,
Um, yeah,
it's
on it.
McGilchrist's
Yeah,
bag, right?
right, right, right.
Um, yeah, and I think, well, the weird thing is, right? So, um, I think, well, the weird thing is, I mean, right now, you know, everything in a way, and I know this from tuning a guitar, is an approximation.
Yeah, yeah,
Like right now, I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at an approximation of you,
yeah, yeah.
right? Which is helpful, right? I mean, it's, you know, when we got on before we started recording, my camera wouldn't go on.
Could have been
You
on
know,
my end.
I can hear you. It's like I'm a disembodied voice. Um,
There's
and
got to
it,
be a list of the you know the worst podcasts in terms of technology or
oh
something.
shit,
We're
yeah.
proudly there. Yeah, go ahead.
But like I could talk to you on the phone, and I've done that many times, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I know it's you,
yeah.
but and that's actually, you know, and now we get to speak to each other in real time, and I get to see you at the same time.
Hmm.
But I'm not really seeing you.
No.
I'm seeing pixels representing you,
Hmm.
right? And I think and which is, you know, I am not complaining about that at all. I mean, I would rather have
Me
that than
neither.
not have that.
Yeah, yeah.
But the danger is we start to think that's real. Just like with recorded music, we start to think that's real.
Hmm.
It's not real music. It's a recording of real music.
Hmm.
Just like a photograph is not real people, it's a recorded image of the real people, right? And more, we're not having that in the world experience of music or of people. You know, probably I
Hmm.
experience people more online or, you know, except for my family, uh, through mediated means like this than I do in the real world.
Right.
And I think that's true. And it's probably true for everybody. And I think, um, there are of course benefits, but there are also dangers that come with that, right? That's what like we found out during COVID that people who were kids in particular, but people too who were stuck at home, working at home, even having meetings at home, were still extraordinarily depressed,
Yeah.
feeling isolated, even though they talk to people every day. or they interact with people, or they watch videos, or whatever they do, right?
Yeah, it's funny, but I feel some like silence in my gut because it's like so much the central issue, you know, bringing
Yeah.
people together, bringing people together, bringing
And will
people
it
together.
break, or will we get more and more trapped into it?
Hmm.
I don't know what's going to happen.
What right now on a Saturday morning, and we could maybe start a cataract of things coming out. What if for you is the most hopeful signs going on right now to counteract that, disembodiment, the separation, disembodiment, left brainism?
Hmm. That's a tough question.
Because like that's, when they say there's a big thing in this class I'm teaching about you can try to kind of improve the world by having the right set of opinions. In my experience at the monastery when I worked this, there was a CSA, Scottish Highland cattle. So we had life in the abstract kind of coming. But in retrospect, and I think I've mentioned it on this, uh, but if maybe we had just started serving a real concrete need for real individuals, and it could be soldiers with PTSD, maybe living in one of the retreat houses, just meeting their need, then the cattle make sense because they're engaging with the real. That instead of creating the real, that's just kind of on the background for retreatants, which is better than the unreal. But there was always something real. They still had to walk, a quarter mile to liturgy and so forth. But the the concreteness aspect, of when we rebuild this culture, so many things are breaking down now. But concrete actions that people can do. Front Porch Republic tries to have local front porches.
Mhm.
Sometimes I don't follow everything that goes on, but when I see that some people have just done that, I think good for them in some small way. That's like, Wendell Berry. One of his greatest poems, I think, is called "Practice Resurrection." Right? So he's just talking about these little practices we can do, like Fox, right in the wrong, run sometimes in the wrong direction. Just confuse the algorithm, do little
Mhm.
things to just break it up, and that might be resurrection in our time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. You know, I mean, I
That's
just
great.
don't.
It's what if this podcast just stopped right now? We've been talking for 3 years, have a lot of ideas. I just don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, I
I
don't
don't.
either.
And you know, and where did I see it now? Something I caught this week. This is another great thing for the internet. I think there was like my wife, I think, was watching this video and she shared it with me
Mhm.
about, and in fact, I don't, you saw this. I don't know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wants to get cell phones banned in schools because he thinks and there is research, but you never hear about
Yeah,
it
yeah.
on whether it's 5G, the radiation from phones is damaging to the brains of kids.
Wow. Wow.
And and someone was talking about 5G and how dangerous that is, and I think it probably is, but
Yeah, I just don't know. Yeah.
well, not that I don't know.
I
I
just
think,
know that they probably don't test this stuff enough before they
oh, the
do it.
hell
That's
no,
what
they
I
don't
do
test
know.
it.
Yeah, yeah,
Just like the COVID vaccines or
yeah,
whatever.
right. Yeah.
Don't test that either. They just
Uh-huh.
roll it out because, hey, this is great for us.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so the person was talking about ways to counteract that,
Yeah.
right? Or even chemtrails and stuff like that. I mean, how do you counteract this stuff? And actually, believe it or not, there was a piece of legislation in the Michigan House of Representatives yesterday, I think, introduced to ban chemtrails in Michigan.
Hmm.
And other states have done this, I think Tennessee
Yeah.
or Kentucky, and which means they really exist.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, how do they? Yeah, what's the
Well, there's all
canvas they're
kinds of
working with? Yeah,
evidence
yeah.
about
Sure,
it,
sure,
right?
sure. Yeah, right.
And it goes back.
But what is again? But still, the question's out there. What does banning something that officially doesn't exist mean? But like, so did a congressperson, like a state representative, forward this thing?
Yeah, I
Yeah, it's
saw.
really
Yeah,
funny. Yeah.
he's I can't remember his name, but he's the state representative of Oxford, Michigan.
Uh-huh.
Um, and anyway, so the person was talking about ways to counteract this, and I know this is how you counteract it. People talk about forest bathing, right?
Yeah.
Which means that's a fancy way to say get the hell outside, right?
Yeah. Right.
Go outside in nature.
They do it sometimes at the school, SUNY Geneseo, and all I can say is, like, uh, good for them. Good for them.
And the other thing was being around music or laughter
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
talking to, and hanging out with people, and
yeah,
that because there's there there Goethe or Stein would call them forces of levity, right?
yeah. Right.
There's gravity. We talked about the force of gravity, which pulls you down, right?
Hmm.
But there's another force in nature which nobody ever talks about, which is levity,
Yeah. Which
which
should be tied to humor.
it's
Yeah,
humor because it
yeah,
brings you up, right? It
yeah,
lifts
yeah.
you up, but it's what lifts plants up. I mean, why
Yeah.
isn't everything just flat on the ground? Because
Yeah.
we have gravity, right? There's a
Hmm.
counter force, which nobody ever talks about.
Hmm.
There is definitely a counter force.
Chesterton angels fly because they take themselves so lightly, right? But but the even in the I do want to introduce this, and it's not for long discussion, but in this Gerald Hurd, when you look at the history of religions, you have kind of life religions, and then maybe in the Western Church, too much a focus on the cross as opposed to resurrection, right? Resurrection's upward, but so when you think of resurrection, you're thinking of levity. You would be thinking of humorous, and then something about sexuality too. The laughing person, their whole body becomes kind of like sensualized, right? That idea
Right.
that in that middle period, nominalism and so forth, you get this type of you know congestion in the erogenous zone, just like there. But this telling of the tale, there's a way to like interweave everything in this, that we're going from a period of the tragic. Gerald Hurd also says, and I thought it was so funny, he goes like repression is um is polar, means it produces like this humanity compassion. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Like people who are all bottled up down there who don't have levity, the kind of serious social justice warrior. He says, no, you can prove it in other ways that this
Hmm.
kind of repression, where, a good form of celibacy can be levity, right? You're kind of blocking up the dam here, so your whole body is erotic, the way you communicate with trees and things like this. But that negative form, which is there in our Ortho Bros and our Catholics, again, the prizing of the celibate life, the monastic life,
Hmm.
that's a level higher. We're going to need, it's harder to get these themes out there, but we're going to have to fight like hell to get these
Right.
themes of like what we need right now. Yeah.
Well, and actually, in my Substack this week, I wrote about Robert Burns and William Blake
I saw that.
because,
I wasn't able, I knew there was going to be, I love those guys. You also had somebody, romanticism was in there too, right?
right,
Yeah.
practical romanticism, I
Okay.
guess.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, because I mean, those are two guys who had, on paper, shitty lives.
Yeah.
They lived at the edge of poverty their entire lives. Robert Burns even described himself as half starved, half
Uh,
mad, and half naked.
hmm.
At one point in a letter to somebody. Um, but the problem with both, I mean, and they're such different poets, but they were almost exactly the same age. They were only 2 years apart. Um, but they're also Robert Burns was lived in rural Scotland, and Blake for most of his life lived in London,
Hmm.
so he's very urban. But they're both dealing with the same problem, like in Blake's poem London, right?
Yep.
Yeah. How you know the disease of modernity, that which is really a political disease. It all has to do with the stuff the gravity forces, like when Blake says in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell that prisons are built with the stones of wall, brothels with the bricks of religion, right?
Yeah. Or in
That
London, the marriage hearse,
well,
right?
that's the
These,
poem. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. The whole thing comes down. It can turn these should be levity things into this downward thing, right?
right.
Yes, yes.
And that's the same thing. Burns is dealing with the same thing
Hmm.
now. With Burns, it has a lot to do with being Scottish and living under the yoke of British rule,
Yeah,
English
it's a
rule.
horrible way to live.
And he often brings up William Wallace in his poems. I'm surprised how many times he mentions
Hmm.
Wallace. I mean, I probably shouldn't have been, but there's a lot of times. Um, as an image of that, but also he uses William Wallace on like the high end, but the low end, he talks about the English trying to suppress Scottish distilleries.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And one of the things I wrote in there, you might not know this, but the nursery rhyme Jack and Jill, which it may not have originally been written with this intention, but it was turned into this intention with Jack and Jill went up the hill, right? Well, what happened some people interpret that as a warning to King Charles, I think the first, who is imposing taxes on a Jack and a Jill. Or
Mm,
actually, it was they weren't imposing taxes. They wanted to impose taxes, but people were resisting. And a Jack is a half a pint, and a
okay.
Jill is a quarter pint.
Hmm.
And so, which means those were the drinks of the poor people.
Interesting.
And this is
Mhm.
like they do now with shrinkflation, right? Where they wanted to impose a tax on there, but there was a lot of pushback. So what they did, they reduced the size,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
It's getting
that's what
so
Jack.
funny now with that, like the sizes with everything. It's outrageous.
I know. I bought
Yeah.
it like I bought some coffee. I was like, you used to get 2 weeks out of a bag of coffee like this. What
Yeah.
happened?
Yeah. Hmm.
Then you realize they reduced the amount for less,
Shrinkflation. I didn't know it was called that.
right? Um, but but those things are, that kind of even soft tyranny is
Yeah.
still tyranny, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And those are gravity forces, and and what Blake, a big theme in Blake is liberty and freedom, right?
Yeah.
The freedom of the imagination, the freedom to
Yeah.
exercise the arts of imagination,
Hmm.
right? And the same thing with William Wallace, and remember, and Burns. I mean, and I think this is we've talked about this before, and I actually in that article I talk a lot about Christian anarchism, because a lot of Christian anarchists I know were the first in line, to support mandatory shots and vaccines
Hmm.
and in lockdowns, or at least people with Christian anarchist sympathies. And I'm like, hell no, right? And with and like we've talked before, right? I mean, you can be a Christian anarchist, you can say you're a Christian anarchist all day, but if you don't live in a place where the government will leave you alone to try to work out your Christian anarchism, that doesn't matter. And I've seen this
Hmm.
time and time again with like in this great state of New York recently, where the great state of New York is demanding Amish kids get vaccinated to be
Are they?
well, that are in school, even though they're in
Yeah.
school with other Amish kids,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And that's an example of the yoke of the law.
What is the resistance looking like? I'll follow that.
I haven't heard, but I
Yeah.
saw the story, and which is they just do that
Yeah.
to be bullies, right?
I was reading Edmund Wilson's Apologies to the Iroquois. If you haven't read it, it's just so great. But again, it's like New York State. He just didn't, he had never really met, it would be like somebody not having really engaged with the Amish. They're all around us now. But he had never really met the Iroquois. And all of a sudden he did. And then he just kind of just saw like, wow, wow. All the government does is fuck with him. Like
Hmm.
he just couldn't believe it. Just
Yeah,
couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. Just there was just is knocking at the door to keep on messing with everybody's way of life. And because apparently they know something. They'll never tell us. The bright future looks like something. So we have to keep on confusing means and ends. You're going to keep on getting more miserable now, but right around the corner is the great thing. It's just disgusting. Just stop messing with people all the time. No, but they know what's going to happen. We have to mess with people. We have to mess with people.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's. I mean, I don't know what to do with that.
Your temperament too. I've
Well,
got it pretty
you know what I
strong.
mean?
You're
I mean,
strong. I don't know what to do with it. Bothers
that
me a lot. Yeah.
and well, the thing is, I mean, kind of my basic disposition is to rebel against everything.
Yeah.
I'm like that song by the Marx Brothers. Whatever it is, I'm against it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And but and that's why politically, I would prefer to not get involved politically at all. Kind of like the Amish, but
Uh-huh.
the Amish came out and voted for Trump,
Right. Many did. Yeah.
and they did because they're
They want to be left alone.
choose a government that will leave them alone as much
Yeah.
as possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, can I just live my life?
Hmm.
Can you just leave me alone so I
Yeah.
can live my life and try to make a life?
Yeah.
That's not too much to ask for.
Yeah.
In our culture, it is too much to ask for.
Hmm.
You know, um, So interesting. In the state of Michigan, they made a law not long ago that it was mandatory that if you have children in the house, you have to have and you have guns, they have to be locked up and all this kind of stuff, right? Um, which because there was a school shooting at Oxford. Oxford comes up again.
Yeah.
A couple years ago. Um, but what's the thing is for people who are out here in the country, it's like what? Because a lot of people in the country will keep like a shotgun right by the kitchen door in case there's coyotes or
Uh-huh.
raccoons eating your chickens or fighting with your dog or whatever, right?
Right, right, right.
Because and you don't have time to go, okay, I'm going to unlock the door. What's the combination? You know what I mean? By the time you do that, forget it.
Yeah,
Or God forbid, a home invasion,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
You know,
It's
but
all these things, a culture of safety where, what Illich would say is where they take the prudent. Sure, lock your gun up. No, no problem there. It's very prudent. But when we turn it into the good, and when we turn it into the good, the absolute good, then there's a right and then there's a wrong. Then, there's a right side of the history, and then there's this huge black and white thing that happens. I used to put recycling into the prudent. When it got lifted up to the good, you just had everybody was just playing policeman over their neighbors, and it just brings out a culture again that's really repressive and weird and overly serious, devoid of humor and levity, where everybody's just such a moralist. They think they got out of Puritan moralism, and I'm not saying anything unique here, but it's
Mhm.
just come back. It's just come back, this moralism, moralism, moralism.
Right. It's like the great episode from Seinfeld with the ribbon.
What was that one? I've seen most all Seinfeld.
Where Kramer is going on like a cancer walk or something, and they're all
Uh-huh. Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah.
the ribbon, and he's
Uh-huh.
not wearing the ribbon, and they're like, "Hey, where's your ribbon?"
Yeah,
I don't want the ribbon. He goes, "You don't support it? Well, I'm walking with you." And then at the end of the walk, they all beat his ass, right?
yeah, yeah.
Larry David's a genius,
He is. A lot of that stuff is great. Mm.
but that's how it goes.
Yeah. Um, there was something else I was going to say even on that. The um, I wrote something down that I thought, not necessarily, not necessarily. We don't have to stretch things out unnecessarily. What else is new with you? What are you reading now?
Well, I'm giving that course on Jerusalem by William Blake, so I've been reading Jerusalem. But what else was I? I was reading.
What's your favorite secondary literature on Blake? I got a funny Blake story when I was in Columbus. Think about that. I was, you know, uh, grandson James is not a year old yet. He'll be in late summer, year old, and my son dutifully reads to him. His mother and I read to them a lot. But since James doesn't know what the frick anybody's reading to him, he's too young. But my son heard us talk about William Blake. So he just thought, poetry, and maybe we were talking about songs of innocence and experience, which can be heard at many different levels. But he brought down like this huge Blake compilation. And this is just, the other weekend. It's like, Dad, I'm just not really sure I understand this stuff because I think he might have
Right.
begun in Jerusalem,
Yeah,
and
that's
it
the
is.
deep end of the pool for
It
sure.
is the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and
Yeah,
I've been reading it for a long time, so I
yeah,
probably have less of a challenge than other people. But you're walking into another guy's dream,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Which I like. But I'm reading that, and I'm reading. Well, I was rereading. I slowed down. Nikos Kazantzakis,
Yeah,
his book Report to Greco, which is his memoir,
yeah,
which is it's wonderful. I mean, he's really a good writer,
yeah,
felicitous writer. And it's nice to read, you know, somebody who can really write.
yeah.
And the older I get, if I read something and it's really not a great writer for outside of my gig as an editor, I'm like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
not reading. I'm not.
No,
I'm not
I'm
gonna.
with you too.
I'm
I'm
not
with you
gonna.
too.
I'm not. I don't. Life is too damn short. I'm not reading this one cover to cover.
I was reading something yesterday on like I've got a theory on synodality, and we might unpack it. But so it seems like Pope Francis, basically on his deathbed, comes out, and then through a Cardinal Mario Gretsch or something, I work for the diocese. You get this whole notion that like it's here, this thing called synodality, and our friend Larry wrote on it. We've got to get Larry back again soon.
Yeah,
But
he can get us kicked off YouTube again.
yeah. But I wondered, this theme again of Christos Generos. You were with us when we talked with David Cayley about him, but that Christ instantiated the ecclesial event, and what they took from the Greek polis This marriage of, when you had the gospel, the Greeks took to it like flies to shit because in the polis, according to Ionaros, instead of truth being this kind of scholastic thing, as I'm mentioning, it was you and me coming together and saying, okay, we're going to call this a cell phone, this is an orange. And it was basically unanimity, and they moved on. But it was the polis was conceived as a mode towards truth. Not as an object, but a verb. The polis was a verb towards truth. And it was just a wild experiment in human history. And then when that got wedded to the gospel, this unity that was being formed there, when Christ met it, then they knew why they were interested in this, why they were interested. And it just blew up for them. So we have this kind of Western church that's dying. There's no two ways to talk about it. It's dying. But in this, this Janist face figure, as I see it, Pope Francis, kind of selling out at the same time as he kind of punches out and is doing something really upsetting. That I was reading Ionaros, and the reason it ties into the Last Temptation of Christ is maybe a decade ago, the Eastern Orthodox churches tried to come together in a synod in Crete, but the Russians weren't there. There was a last minute holdout from another place. And this guy was using Ionaros to reflect on that experience of trying to be synodal, even in the Eastern Orthodox churches. And that it brought up some of this Puritanism, which we began with. How many of those Ortho-Bro, because they valued like Mount Athos so much, how many of them hated the Last Temptation of Christ with a passion. It was the work of the devil. It was the work of the devil.
Well, remember that whole thing when the movie came out?
Yeah. In the Catholics, so many Catholics, were caught up in it too.
And I love that movie.
Peter Gabriel's soundtrack to that movie is a work of art.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do like that movie actually, and I think Kevin Hughes, I don't know if you know Kevin. He said, maybe it was Kevin, but certainly My Path Back to the Church, that film was a big part of it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying for you and Kevin, or for Kevin?
I think Kevin was the one.
Okay.
When I talked about it with him, he loves the movie too.
I think I watched it. I was probably in a little more of an apologetics phase of my life. That's not totally, it's understandable, I should say. And I don't think I went in to see it wanting to hate on it. I never really went through that strong of a phase of apologetics. Like I just want to be the more orthodox guy but I think I went in kind of having read some things, kind of buying the case against it, and just love the movie. Just love the movie.
It's beautiful.
Yep.
And in fact, I don't think I watched it last year. It's a long movie too, but I'm feeling I want to watch it again.
Yeah.
I'm getting an anticipation of Easter.
Yeah.
Oh, another thing, I haven't read it yet, but we should actually have her back on, is Laurie Johnson's new book.
She's really good. Yeah.
The Gap in God's Country. So we gotta. I've been meaning to email you and her to say we should get her on the show.
Did she? Is that published by Angelica, or did she just send it to you? Okay, cool.
It's from Cascade, which is an imprint of Width and Stock. They got to figure a better word than Width. That's a hard one.
Tough one. It is. Front Porch Press is a sub of Width.
Oh yeah, Width
and Stock. Yeah, I go back and forth. Width.
Yeah, spit that one out.
Yeah. What's the thesis of that book?
I don't know. I haven't started reading it. It's been sitting there waiting for me.
Yeah.
I've been swamped.
Yeah. Anyhow, I think, and I wasn't even thinking I was going there, but the way a romanticized view I have of synodality, which could be like this polis, like people getting together when we're talking about what can we do to fight back. I can't, if you ever see something by this Ionaros, Mike, and David Cayley was blown away when he saw it, but like if we got this story when I asked you to talk about like Natura Pura, where we are with outness, just an amalgam of things out there. We've trained ourselves that we're just an individual with a brain, specifically a left brain, looking at a world of just like things that are filled with atoms or something. That is a result that whole world, the dying Western world we're living in right now, the dying Western church we're living in right now. And again, Ionaros' theme, which is so refreshing. And if you didn't have this, I couldn't encourage you to kind of delve into that corpus. But he it's the things that the ortho bros and the rad trad have in common, right? This left brainism has infiltrated them so much. And again, especially to see that all
There's
these like really intelligent people have converted there, and they put these weird Eastern Orthodox monks on pedestals, and
Mhm.
they've like, it's really weird to me. But that synodality, if you hear like this, I don't like this guy too much. Um, People outside of America in the Catholic Church just usually have a bad take on America, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
Anthony Spadaro, the Pope's #1 Jesuit, this Austin Ivory, I was listening to a lecture of him the other day on synodality, and he was describing it, and he's a bright guy, and you go to the next level on this thing that's easy to, and we'd have to talk to Larry about this, and I don't think Larry and Austin see, but they're both strong.
Larry's not a
But
fan, right?
no. I don't think so. Or again, but when he wrote about kind of Pope Francis coming back from illness, just to kind of like put this thing to say this is magisterial teaching. That actually isn't what happened this week, but to say there's a big meeting in 2028 and this thing is continuing. Larry had a very thoughtful article at the National Catholic Register, just asking a lot of questions about it, and I can understand that.
Hmm.
But if this is the way the meta story is going in the West, this is what we've done. We've objectified William Blake's, let's say William Blake's critique, his worldview is even slightly correct. The only way out of it, possibly, the only way is synodality. Again, with small cells of people trying to find a common way of life together, right? And that's this kind of to weave together some themes, something practical, engaging with other people just on small tasks, things like that. Because the rest of this stuff is mumbo jumbo. But there is truth out there. We've beaten and abused truth. When truth was a teenager, we try to control it too much, I think. But truth
Right.
is out there, and Dostoevsky saw truth and beauty and goodness, and it's like we've been the theme of this conversation. It's not as easily packaged as you thought it was. There's an
Hmm.
underworld that's dark and complicated, in addition to the overworld, things like that.
Right.
But I think synodality, people coming together and just, again, admitting that truth isn't going to come from you and I reading books of rationalist logic and things like that, or poetry circles, people like this. But uh, this is in our time. We have all these things going on politically. Very interesting to watch. I'm just becoming more and more convinced that, the larger context of somebody like a John Michael Greer, just this is what decline looks like, folk. Lately at my job, when people they suspect, I didn't vote for Trump, but again, that's a liberty I had in New York. But that I think it gets around that I think Trump as uniquely evil is a weak intellectual edifice. Um, maybe one of the weakest to hang a whole worldview around, that he's
Hmm.
somehow in the history of the West uniquely evil and not just the result of something. People come in and oh yeah, I'll say he's a result of something. This is again, I'll say Caesar figure. I don't even know if I don't need to die on that hill, but he's not sui generis. He was voted in for huge problems that people thought needed to be addressed that were just so outrageous and nobody was talking
And
about it.
serious problems too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this could be,
Um,
again, it could be an overreaction on his part. I don't have it all sorting out, but if they can't admit there was like massive lies from top to bottom, JFK files, this is starting to be interesting, isn't it?
mhm.
That even if that stuff they're saying that we knew then about the CIA, I hope people just start reevaluating their current love affair with the CIA. If they, back in that day, if they loved John F. Kennedy and he saw, as Jimmy Carter did too, Jimmy Carter saw this problem with the CIA.
Right.
Can't we come together, left and right, to say the CIA is a problem? You know?
Right. But
Yeah,
Mike, I mean, this is something that's really been bothering me,
yeah,
you know, especially because my family suffered uniquely from this. But
yeah,
um, 5 years ago when the COVID dropped,
yeah,
um, and it hasn't turned around. So many people I know, who had been gigantic, and I mean vociferous critics of the evils of big pharma, all of a sudden got all in on
yeah,
Team Big Pharma,
yeah.
and they haven't retracted.
Isn't the larger story? I agree with you how crazy that is, but like if Kathleen Rain said that the only significant theme of William Blake, which is the total theme, is the imagination versus science, Big Pharma, like if we were to get out of this, I agree with you, everybody was wrong. But we need to have
they're persisting in their wrongness.
they are, but don't you think
Just like
reality, the return of the repressed is coming back? Reality, I'm not really worried about that so much.
I think
Reality
that's
is just
true.
showing that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that's
We
true.
got to start just
The
building the
return
next
of the
thing.
repressed, and the repressed just voted Donald Trump into office.
Right, right.
But the
But the
other
repressed isn't
issue,
always a pretty thing, so
you
that
know,
reaction to the repressed can be an ugly thing.
the
Yeah,
traditional lefty, and this is when I was a lefty, right? The
yeah,
traditional lefty positions were anti-war, anti-corporations,
right.
pro-freedom, right?
Oh, yeah.
Those are the antithesis of the left's values at the moment.
It's because the God of science, I think, has is the regnant one, and it's gathered those things that when to stay loyal to the God of Western materialist science, which reifies the outness by and large. Again, you have quantum physics. Barfield's great work was to say that those geologists can't talk to quantum physicists, right? The reified, the outness scientists who just think, that Philip Sherrard, the great, uh,
Mhm.
Orthodox scholar,
Yep.
the rape of man in nature, that view, can't play with the paranoia of like, wow, things are not as things are not as simple as you want. But I think in order to come out of this constructively, everything you're saying is 100% right. But we've got to figure out ways where we can get the people together on this stuff. Because I think the reality is just coming up. That all this stuff is coming out. The JFK files slowly. We want the Epstein files to come out. But we're going to be dealing with this. But we're going to need to start building that worldview where we can all say, where we went wrong and things like that. But this, you're teaching the course on Jerusalem. Um, but don't let what I just said like diminish anything you said. But I
Hmm.
just think, this left brainism is the enemy. It's the enemy. But
Right.
these people were raised in schools that taught them. I just didn't when people say, did you homeschool your kid? I'm like, kind of. We just didn't take school seriously. I just saw it as like a tyranny of left brainism. So they were there
Right.
sometimes, they were gone sometimes. They went to a Catholic school, a public school. I just didn't care about it. Um, and, but we've created a world that was meant to follow this, and what do we start doing? Because those same people who followed this more, I think they kind of want out of some of that world. And when you were talking about Robert Kennedy Jr., I'm going to say something I've said many times, but we've got to change schools. Schools without screens are one step better, but we've got to get rid of these freaking huge institutions that look like jails that people get on jail buses to go to every day. They're
Hmm.
away from their parents. These schools have gotten way too big. Um, we and you're a genius on cultural renewal. Yeah, that's not to disagree with anything you said.
No, but I think, in a way, you can see everything is of a piece. I mean, when you talk about synodality, I like the idea, but I don't like top-down
No,
synodality,
no, no, right, right,
right?
right.
Imposed from above, right?
Yeah,
And then the weird thing is in the Catholic Church at the moment, right? One of the only places you really see before this push for synodality was in the traditional Latin Mass, and those communities have formed around that. They're doing synodality, and so they're doing synodality, but they're like, no, 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 not that synodality, right? And then you get that from the Pope, which is weird,
I thought that
right?
was horrible. Yeah,
And it's like talk about the COVID thing, right? Where you had
yeah,
people ostensibly Catholic lefties or Catholic anarchists who were, yeah, you should get the shots because it helps to protect other
yeah,
people, which is a kind of a Christianity at gunpoint, right?
yeah.
It's not a free, you're not doing it out of yourself,
I know, but have fun and put it in this context. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and I remembered because I'm following this whole storyline of like soft power and the Catholic Church. Sometimes on the right, sometimes on the left. William Buckley on the right, huge elements of like First Things. But there was back in the day when Newhouse was editing First Things. Not my favorite guy, but he had an article he was writing about things going on in Tibet. But Hollywood's, all these kind of cosplayers who are just
Mhm.
behind that cause. But the title of his little snippet in that significant end of the magazine thing he did everything like Final Thoughts or something was
Mhm.
Hollywood notwithstanding, free to bet. Um, you know, and there's a way. So with synodality, there's a way to be annoyed at the way it's coming. You know, there's a way to be annoyed, but I'm saying like I'm coming to the conclusion that the only way out of this thing is to have people coming together in the Catholic Church and talking. So Vatican notwithstanding, synodality. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
part of me
We
now,
don't like the messenger sometimes. You know, I mean, he could be super annoying. What he did with
what I
yeah
think, the other thing, I hate to be cynical, but I am.
yeah.
Part of me looks at that and says, well, they know they can read the handwriting on the wall, so they're trying to get ahead of the game to still be the guys in charge, right?
Could be like bankruptcy, the writing on the wall, or just
No, they're looking at they see, oh, the church is about to collapse. It's
yeah.
going to become little pieces. Let's make a move so we can have the control once does fall apart, which the archons do. I think they've been doing it politically, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I love about Donald Trump is kind of disruptor, right? Is this disruptive force that, like a bull in a china shop that just f's with everything. And people, and you saw this if when he first came into office, he was doing that, and I think the left was like, uh, "What are we going to
I
do?"
think
And
so. I
then,
think so.
and then they finally figured out. I think you saw recently with all these weird injunctions by lower court judges. They found we'll get those guys going, right? That's what I
Hmm.
think is happening. But what I think is so they people can, it's not just podcasters like you and me who can see what's coming. It's the people who actually have the power who can see what's coming, and they know it's coming to an end.
Yeah.
And so
But I want
what
to go back to
happens
Michael
though?
Greer. Go
No,
ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
when they see what's
Yeah.
happening, they anticipate what they have to do. The World Economic Forum is great at this. They anticipate what they have to do like we've talked with Guido 100 times, to be 10
Yeah.
steps ahead.
Right.
They know it's going to fall apart. So how can we be the guys still in control when it falls apart? How can we see where this game is going, right?
Yeah.
But so that I think all of that is still like that kind of gravity thing we've been talking about, that left brain approach to things.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know if this is when I say I don't know what's going to happen. I really mean I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But thinking so much about quantum mechanics lately and its relationship to spirituality and the other world and all this other stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I certainly feel that we're on the cusp of some kind of revelation. Surely some revelation is hand. The second coming,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I'm
That,
comfortable with that.
but that this revelation that is hand, and I even think, I was going to use the word cosmic consciousness, cosmic Christ. I think very much a
Totally
Teo
fine. Hmm.
approach, which he was talking about 80 years ago. Um, but even that is still too left brain for me to think about.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I think, you know,
I think that's a Tay Hardian kind of fault. It's still a little bit left-brained.
well,
Yeah.
he's a scientist. What do you
Sure.
expect, right?
Sure. Totally. Totally.
Um, but I,
But
but
think
I,
of
but
Age of
I
Aquarius too. Age of Aquarius. There's themes there, right? That,
yeah,
bottom up, the reestablishment of not like we're speaking Greek, but the themes again of resurrection. We went through a period of like life religions to kind of a death religion back to, just use that tripartite thing of Steiner, from the feminine to the feminine and masculine combined, from the east to the west to the east and west combined. But I think we can kind of feel some of the themes that might be lasting. These themes are dying. And the next themes, I think we've been given some chords to the next musical score. That
mhm,
the life religions, when Chesterton, you quote him so much, we need to repaganize the church. So, but that lower paganism, just like the lower divine feminine that threatens to devour her young, the she wolf, that, the nurturing divine feminine can
right,
become that now that the feminine has been all too much repressed. It's coming back. The
mhm,
unconscious, the quantum mechanics. This guy Gerald Hurd said, when you get into quantum mechanics, or you get into this other thing about what they're discovering with the human mind. When you get into quantum mechanics, this is the way I read them, is like you can look at it and you see something looking back at you, right? Whoa, it just used to be matter. Now it's not quite what we thought. And you keep on splitting things and splitting them. And all of a sudden you get to a place at the quantum level where it feels like somebody is looking back at you, God as personality, as
Mhm.
opposed to God as and on the other level, um, you can experience the uncanny is if you sit still and if you just use Jesus's image of the vine and the branches, but you think that you're looking out at the world, but some entity is also looking through your
Right.
eyes at the world, right? Yeah, yeah.
And
Um,
that and
and to
that there's
spend
not
time at both of those ends of the spectrum every day, to think about the mysteries as you're doing with quantum things right now. And then at the other end, just to sit there and say, like, whoa, what's staring through my eyes with me? What's the larger percipient reality of this whole thing?
Mhm.
Nobody's going to be able to take. Darwin's going to crash. We don't have to worry about these things. Darwin's going to crash and fall pretty fast. Um, we're finding that it's going to be really hard to look at the universe and not see. When you look at the whole fun of reading a great novel, like you say, you have no tolerance anymore. It's because when you read a great novel, you're meeting a great personality who wrote that novel, right? Like,
Mhm.
and when you see a beautiful painting, who made this thing? And and they made these two different things. Lately, I've been thinking about Stephen Sondheim a lot. Um, that he made Sweeney Todd and also made this. Like, what was going on in his mind? And then I think, that leads you to it's just only the idiots won't be able to see the great artist or intuit the great artist in our time. So the idea that we need a religion that we're worried about, this guy doesn't believe in God. Remember, that's been a problem. I have a friend who doesn't believe in God. People aren't going to probably, it's going to become a little bit too real for them, I think. And, I just don't worry about that as much. I think we just start building the kingdom of God.
Right, but I also think and this is and I think this is I just don't want to get spooky, but I think there's the war of the archons
Oh, sure.
that don't want that to happen. They see it coming and they don't want that to happen.
Yep, yep.
Right? And I think that kind of spiritual battle is a real thing. In fact, what really
It
surprised
is. It
me
is. It is.
going over the last few years, Naomi Wolf, whom I usually agree with, but not always, but she went from kind of a secular humanist point of view about things to she's really getting quite kind of almost Christian,
Hmm.
even though she comes from a Jewish background. And she's been describing what we're going through as a spiritual battle,
Yeah. Oh, for
and
sure.
that's not a metaphor,
No, no.
And I think, but like I keep saying, right, and like we've said with Guido, the bad guys they can read the tea leaves too.
Hmm.
They know astrology too. They know it's coming. They know the jig is up. But, like with everything else, how do they position themselves to be the next ones in power again?
Yeah. But I think, and I'm not trying to be facetious here. It might sound pie in the sky. I think we know enough about, like, it will be fought not with the old gesture of Michael, but Steiner's new gesture. Humor will be key. Humility and humor and hummus, they're all related, just like cult culture and agriculture and things like that. But I think we've been told enough already that it would be an insult to God and the message that he gave us. Because another way of looking at this, not in a purely Joachim Fiore way, is like the Holy Spirit is coming into her her existence at this time, right? The importance of the human personality, the flame is descending. So again, we've got to step up, but it's not with the old battles of swashbuckling. I think that's
Right.
the biggest one for us.
Well,
We
and I
renounce
think
violence and we embrace humor. If
that and
Charlie
that's
Chaplin
sorry.
was better fighting Hitler than Franz Jagerstatter, that's you've heard me say that, but I actually think that's true. That it kind of the solemn thing, and he's a saint. I mean, great. And the movie was just okay for me, but again, it was just too real for me. COVID was shutting down. I went to see it. It was the last movie I got to see in a theater, and then I
Mhm.
watched The Great Dictator. And the future is on the side of Charlie Chaplin more than Jagerstatter.
Yeah.
Yep.
But and the point is, though, I mean, and I think you're pointing to something important that this kind of warfare is not necessarily fought with guns, right?
Right.
It's an information warfare. It's what do they call it? Fifth generation
And
warfare.
it's probably not just like this either, you
Which is
know?
which is why the archons of our days are trying to shut down
Yes.
the ability for people to communicate these ideas with people,
Yeah.
or any ideas that are not state approved.
And we need, again, the church hall, or again, it should be our houses, but the church hall and gatherings like you're doing are more important. They could be more important than just the piety part, right? It's where
Right.
people are gathering. The best thing you can do, having fun is the best revenge. It's just
Hmm.
true. These aren't just slogans. People getting together and celebrating things. It is the best revenge.
Well,
Um,
and then I think about this a lot, that the EU is in a way a diabolical parody of the Communion of Saints.
yeah, it's so
You know
weird. That's
that and that's how it works. I mean, they act like they're saintly and good, but they're not,
no, no,
right? And so, and this again works counter to the idea of synodality, the kind you're talking about, which I think is a
yeah.
synodality, when you still have the top down, Christianity at gunpoint kind of thing.
Mhm.
We're gonna help Ukraine. Well, there's a great scene. I don't know. You probably read Angela's Ashes. Did you read that book?
No, but I know the
My
basic
God,
Frank McCourt thing.
it's beautiful book because you will laugh your head off and cry on the same page.
Okay, yeah,
Brilliant book. But one of the moments in there is Frank McCourt's like a kid in Catholic school, 12 years old or whatever, and they have the sodality of Mary,
yeah.
right? And the kid who's in charge of the sodality of Mary, you're showing up to practice for the sodality on Wednesday? Because if you don't, I'll kick your arse.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
There's so much truth in that.
yeah. And again, I was talking to my wife last night that like back in the day, a part of that stuff of Catholic schools were how we were, but we had such good friends. It actually just was color for us, right? My own son, he was kind of laughing at it, but his teacher at a public school kind of flipped over a desk of a student, which happened to us all the time. But we just had so many of our best friends that we were always like laughing at the teacher who lost his or her cool. But
Hmm.
nowadays, everybody is so weirded out, right? That we just say you can't do it. And I basically came to the terms of yeah, that was really wrong of the teacher to do it because the kids don't have the bandwidth anymore to see the humor in that. But it's another thing I think that's breaking down in our time is the notion that we're going to have to reconnect the humor piece again. That some of the things that we're just saying are so bad in society they have to be laughed off. People are worried so much about like every little act of aggression because they've been so hollowed out that these are real assaults to them right now. So instead of just all we do is we wage war on politics, and we call the left snowflakes and things like that. But we just need to start, building communities where people have bandwidth to take ribbing, to look out for themselves, to stand up for
Left
themselves,
schools
right?
do not have that.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows? What are you doing
Which
today,
is
my
hard.
friend? Yep,
Oh, what am I doing today? Teaching Jerusalem.
yep.
Uh, don't know what else. Last week I should mention that I boiled all my sap down last Friday.
How many gallons did you get?
50 gallons of sap made it down to about almost a gallon and a half of syrup.
Okay, well,
Not too bad.
no.
If I had
Is the
enough,
cleanup just horrible or
no,
no?
no,
Okay,
not at all.
okay. I
I
just
mean,
was worried. Yeah,
most of the stuff stays outside.
yeah.
Not a big deal.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like it's like cooking any other meal, probably less.
I just figured like so if I took it outside, I'd have something, and then but the side and everything, it's just got to be scraped inch by inch to get. Oh, I just thought this the sap would burn on it or something. Like you
Oh
just have
no,
baked sugar on it. Okay.
no. I mean, you get a little bit, not a big deal.
Okay. My brother boils it down. We just, drink some water and tap for the
Yeah.
sake of tapping. But I do tell people like those little gestures. You just tap a tree one year, and that could lead to you. You don't have to do everything at once. This spring, if you've listened to us and you've heard about the joys of gardening, um, move things forward just a
Hmm.
little each year. If
Yeah.
you haven't done it, you don't have to go for anything big. Plant your peppers and your tomatoes. That's what a lot of people do, and they put it on with
Yeah.
some mozzarella cheese, a basil plant.
Start small.
Yep.
Don't,
Yep.
and that people get overwhelmed when they think I could never do all that. Just do one thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I've been having lots of fun with strawberries already this spring. Just where I
Really?
planted them. Well, no, we're not eating them, but where I planted them last fall, just taking chances, When you get into a garden, just I'm going to throw these things here because
Yeah.
they were overcrowding a place, but I was really pleased how they showed up. I went out this morning, um, and I got a little mini greenhouse, and I soaked some broccoli seeds, and I'm big on hydrogen peroxide,
Hmm.
and got them to start germinating, but they can handle the cold pretty good. So I
Hmm.
put them outside. But again, a little bit risky if we got some. For me, it's all play
Yeah.
still, but are you going bigger for your garden this year? Same size? Do you do the same?
Probably a little smaller, I'm hoping.
Okay.
We're trying to not step back this year, probably next year. This will probably might be the last year for the CSA.
Okay.
Um, and I don't know how many people we're going to end up with, so we'll probably not as many. So,
Hmm.
which is okay
Yeah,
because we were going to stop this year because it's a lot of work for not a lot
I
of.
bet. Okay. Yeah.
Though we're hoping to get more for ourselves and actually to sell more things locally.
Okay.
Because when in our CSA we only have 5 or 6 people who are local. Rest of them are 60 miles away.
Oh, wow.
So so that's so we're thinking about that. But I'm looking forward to my garlic is up,
Okay.
and so and my bees lot. Did your bees live?
All of them. But we have 4 hives. They're all flying around. But Amy, my wife, went really, really conservative on honey. She left so much for them, so much for the
That doesn't
bees.
matter necessarily because I've done
Okay.
that lots of times and they all
Huh.
die anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
But the one hive I had at the end of the summer made it through the winter.
Oh, great.
Pleases me greatly because I'm hearing, I don't know if you heard this, but um, the average, I think, across the country is at least 60% loss.
Wow.
But they don't even have enough bees to pollinate the almond crops.
Wow.
And some
Is
people
this
in
year super
Michigan,
unique like that, you're saying? And
yes,
what do they
nobody
attribute?
knows.
Huh.
My beekeeping mentor, checks in with me every once in a while, and he's saying, and I'm on the Facebook page of the Michigan Beekeeping Society, wherever it's called, and they're reporting a lot of people 90% to 100% loss,
Wow.
and nobody knows why.
This is great. My wife, it's her, she takes the lead on bees. She knows, Amy, she knows everything. I don't know anything, and it's also that was a way to liberate her for that, but she also dove right in and knows it. But I'll tell her that's pretty cool. 4 out of 4
Oh,
survived.
you're lucky. Yeah, yeah. You
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
part of 4
Yeah.
this year in particular. That's
Hmm.
that's an accomplishment.
Yeah. Well, and we
Because
got
everybody,
chickens.
I don't know if you guys treat for mites or anything, but
She
people.
she did last year. I know you don't, but she had a mentor,
Well,
and I
I
say like,
do.
yeah,
I
okay,
treat. Yeah.
yep. So she did last year. We didn't the first year, and I think she learned it.
But a lot of times you treat and it doesn't matter anyway. They die anyway. And this
Yeah,
is what
yeah,
most people who've lost uh, colonies treat and
yeah,
treat more than once a year. I only treated once. I treat once with formic acid and another, at the end with essential oils.
yeah,
But it's devastating what's happening.
yeah, yeah. Wow, scary.
Okay.
Well, we'll continue. Thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. Good to see you, my friend, and everybody have a good week.
Very well.